Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast for leaders driven to leave a positive mark through their leadership.
I hope that I will have created some ways in which the circumstances of your birth don't predict the opportunities you have in your life.
I'm Josh Huggins, your host and the founder of GS2 Partnership, a search firm committed to connecting visionaries dedicated to environmental and social betterment.
I have 2 young sons. I want to be able to tell them I did use the resources and expertise of a company to try to create more awareness about climate change.
In each episode, we delve into the minds of executive and future leaders. We discuss how sustainability guides responsible leadership, sparks change, and drives value.
The way of thinking I try and advocate is for us all to think about us having a collective problem to fix, which is climate, and that we need to rebuild our global economy.
We are GS2, and we are on a critical journey to connect to those who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Better Than We Found It. On today's show, I'm delighted to be joined by Julia Staunig. Julia is the Chief Strategy Officer and the Managing Director for the international business of Position Green, the tech and advisory sustainability consultancy business that she's been a part of for a few years now. Julia's career started as an intern within the European Commission and European Parliament and has gone through a range of different roles within the financial services industry, consulting through to today. So this episode is really for somebody who is keen to hear about how you lead with purpose, how having values that absolutely underpin who you are as an individual and within your working career will allow you to elevate yourself to the heights that you wish them to. And actually, if you can align all of those things with your stakeholders and great business ideas, that it can be extremely valuable, profitable, and be a win-win for all. So if that sounds like something that could interest you, then please listen along. I'd love to hear your feedback, and let's dive right in. So Julia, welcome to Better Than We Found It.
Hi Josh, hi, it's great to be here and thanks for having me.
Sure, and it's a little bit of a shame because I know you've just mentioned that you're in London today, and unfortunately we couldn't do it in person. But in spirit, anyway, we're closer, so that's a good thing.
We're closer than we thought, right? But that's the world we live in now, right? We're in the same city, but we're still meeting each other online and not in the studio. Next time we'll be together in real life.
For sure. So it would be wonderful for you to give a bit of an introduction to the audience. I've done a little bit, but I'm sure I haven't done it as much justice as you can. So would you mind giving me an overview of yourself and perhaps Position Green, your role there, and what the purpose of the organisation is?
Well, that's a great question to start up with because I do have the pleasure, and I'm very, very fortunate that I actually now work in a very purpose-driven organization and even a purpose-native organization, which has not always been the case throughout my career, and which was really something that I was looking for when I made my last career change and stepped into Position Green. And I'm sure we'll get into it throughout the conversation. But just to start off with on who I am, so my name is Julia Staunig actually. So I'm originally from Austria, as you can hear in my accent. I'm not German. I'm from Austria. But I have lived and worked outside of Austria, well, the majority of my life now. So you can also figure out what my age approximately is. But I left Austria after my studies and have lived and worked across Europe, Latin America, UK, which is now not part of Europe anymore, which you can also get into. And now I've arrived after a career of about 20-25 years. I've arrived at Position Green. Position Green is originally a company from Scandinavia. It was founded in 2015 in Sweden. And what we do is 2 things. On the one hand, we are a sustainability tech company. So we produce software for ESG data management, ESG data reporting, and also ESG strategizing. And on the other hand, we are an advisory company. So we advise company on all things sustainability, from strategy development to implementation. And then there is the overlap between the two, of course, where we in advisory help develop and improve our software as we go along. So we would very much like to see us really as very data-driven and tech-savvy sustainability consultants as well. And at Position Green, I have a dual role. So on the one hand, I am our Chief Strategy Officer for Position Green, the company, where I have an internal role in making sure that we push ourselves forward as the scale up that we are. So we are still in the very fast scale up phase and expanding into new markets. So that is what I focus on internally and externally, and this is really something that is very important to me. I continue working directly with clients, so both on the software side, where I participate in some of our bigger projects, more complex customers across various markets that have data management needs, and then also on the advisory side, where I advise many clients across our different regions, with a focus on, of course, continental Europe and the UK currently, and where I really get in and help from a practitioner's perspective on how you make sustainability work and how you achieve this transformation that we really need at the company level.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the overview. Definitely, I didn't do it justice, so I'm glad that you gave the full details there. Just a couple of questions before we go back to tell the story then. So in terms of size and scale, how many employees does Position Green have? Where are your offices? And the split between advisory and the tech business, what sort of size split between those two?
Yeah. So we are now about 350 people in total. So a very strong team, split over our homemakings, the Viking homemakings, home markets as I always call it, in Sweden, Norway and Denmark. And we also have offices in the US, both in New York, but also in Texas, in Houston and in Austin. The UK, where I'm today, as we said, the office in London, and in Brussels, which is really our bridgehead into the continental European markets, in addition to our teams in Northern Europe. So we are now split up across, I think it's 11 actual physical office locations. And in terms of our split between software and advisory, we are about 1/3, 2/3. So 1/3 advisory, 2/3 software, where we have around 80 to 100 advisors, and the rest is in software, where we have, the full value chain of software development, starting with the IT developers, the designers. We have a fantastic product team in Malmö that develops our software, a very strong marketing team, and then sales and actually customer success, which is our service consultants that help customers actually apply the software. And that is where then, of course, also the interlink with the advisory team comes in. And there is a close link, of course, between our customer success consultants in software and the advisory team, who work closely together, where in software we help our clients configure the software, and then in advisory we make sure that the output of the software is used to the best value for the client, really. So we do work closely together, but we are also open architecture. We are scale up. It's not our luxury to bundle our products. It's our clients who decide. So our clients very often bring their own advisors that they have always worked with, that then use our software. And in advisory, we also have clients who use other software for many different reasons, for legacy reasons, or also because they're a very large company that wants to use their ERP system. So we have a very flexible approach, which is of course the right one in this very interesting sustainability market today, that is immature, but also developing very, very dynamically.
Absolutely, and we're definitely going to talk a bit about that and perhaps why Position Green. But let's go back because your career interestingly started as an intern, I think it was, in the European Parliament and the European Commission. So perhaps you could share a bit about that and maybe some of the key lessons that being part of those organisations taught you.
That's right, and that's a very good question on this podcast. I was reflecting about that myself this morning when I was preparing a bit for our conversation. I thought, how did I actually get into sustainability? I mean, how did I end up there? And it started with my political interest. And it didn't start on the E side of things, it actually started on the S side of things, where from a very young age I was very passionate about equality. So I come from a very, very political family in Austria, a family that was also traumatized after the Second World War. My dad was born in 1938, which was the beginning of the Second World War in Austria. So I was really steeped in this very strong political background and discussions in my family. And my family was a family of social democrats. So we talked a lot about equality and what it means to be a working class family, and how we need to take care of each other in society. So this is how I was brought up, and what I really strongly believed in when I had to choose which way to go in my career. And I was very pragmatic in the beginning, and I studied business administration because I did believe that business and companies had a big contribution to make to equality, and I wanted to do it in a different way. So now when I stand here that many years later, I hardly reflect over it. But I started out already with this ESG, with a strong focus on the ES theme. And that brought me to politics. So I actually considered becoming a politician. And that is why I ended up in Brussels in the European Parliament, working as an assistant for a member of the European Parliament. And I very, very fast found out that politics was not for me, because there is many dynamics. The ugly side of politics, that wasn't for me. So I went back and I decided to stick and try to make the world a better place from a business vantage point, and contribute to society through that. So that was my start as a very, very fresh young Austrian in Brussels.
And in those conversations in Parliament and politics, how prominent were discussions around sustainability at that time? How much of an undertone did that play?
Such a good question. So, it was a very special time, because my final exams at university took place on the 11th of September 2001. And it gives me the chills just thinking of that, because that was the day the Twin Towers fell. So I was locked into this exam room for a whole day while the world around us was collapsing, and we were really all entering a completely new era of being. I was brought up in a world of possibility, in a world of security, safety, because I was brought up when the Iron Curtain fell, right? So everything was possible, and then everything changed, and that was, we didn't talk about sustainability in the way we talked about sustainability now, but because of what has happened, the ugly side of globalization really had reared its head and had become, the discussion was already there. Naomi Klein had published her book on the globalization trap, but when the Twin Towers fell, it really became apparent that the path the world was on is unsustainable, and that we had created a world that is not going to survive if we don't change our ways. And that was very much also how sustainability, or what we today understand as ESG and sustainability, was focused on back then. It was, how do we solve the big problems that globalization had brought to the fore? And on the environmental side, interestingly enough, there was a completely different conversation, because we didn't see the effects of climate change as we see them today. So the focus there was more on the old style environmentalist approach of conservation, and we need to protect rather than regenerate where we are now. So I would say that we were very immature on the E side back then, too immature, and now it's come back to bite us because we are too late on many of the E challenges. But on the S side of things, we had this really shocking awakening after 9/11.
Sure. So you realised politics wasn't for you, and you felt business could be that force for change. So you, as I understand it, you chose financial services as the place to go. Was that immediate? And what was it that prompted you to work within the finance sector?
Yeah, good question, Josh. So maybe I didn't choose finance, but finance chose me.
I see.
That's a better, well, in your career, and that's always the advice I give to younger people when they ask me, so how do I make the right choices, and I need to plan, and well, you also just need to react to the opportunities that are there, right? You should never live under the illusion that you can plan your career and make the decision in perfect alignment with your 5, 10, and 15-year plan. That's just not how life works. You need to have an idea, of course, what your purpose is. That is perhaps the most important thing, that you keep updating yourself on your own internal compass. So what is it really that I'm good at, and where do I find purpose, rather than having this plan and then I will become senior vice president in the bank and then I will do this. Then there you need to be a little bit more opportunistic, and that is what I was in financial services. So I remember it well. I had studied business administration, and I got a new job at a public affairs agency without knowing what that was, and they had just won their first financial services client, and many people here in the UK in particular will know the company, but back then it was called Norwich Union, which is now Aviva. Yes. So it was a very big new account, and because I had studied business administration, they needed somebody who had some idea of economics to work on it, and that was me. So I was really, again, as the young Austrian, not knowing what public affairs really was, thrown in at the deep end with some very, very, very big, large UK clients. So on the one hand, it was Aviva I was working with from the beginning. On the other hand, it was the Royal Bank of Scotland, which has also since changed and morphed into NatWest via many, many painful twists and turns. So it was more, again, a pragmatic decision on, that was my first time in consultancy. You start working on the clients that come in through the door. But then it was also because one of my colleagues there told me, yeah, in finance, we'll always be safe because they always have big budgets for consultancy. So we won't get fired. So it's actually a good industry to work in. And me, the naive Austrians, pre-financial crisis, who was I'm very risk averse. I was like, oh yeah, that's good. Then I'm safe, and it's good clients to work with, and they have plenty of money. So it was, it's so cute when I look back at how I thought about this myself back then. But that was my way in, yeah. And
Sure.
For many years, I stuck around there.
So you move in, and then we have the global financial crisis, or did you move? Was it how were you already in the bank when the financial crisis hit, or what was the timing for that?
Yeah. So I actually I was quite young when I entered my first job. I was only 22 years old, and then after about 5 years, I had made partner in the consultancy I was working, and I felt I needed more education. I needed to push myself further also on the theoretical front. So I had done an MBA, and I had left consultancy. And one of my then clients, State Street, a really wonderful, wonderful organization with a strong culture, asked me to join their team in London. So then I moved from back then in Copenhagen to London, and I had negotiated my salary, and I was very happy to now go in-house for the first time, not be a consultant anymore, but really work for a long time internally in a good organization. And State Street is an interesting, very, very interesting culture based in Boston, not based in New York. They are a custodian bank. They have a long history of really taking custody of the assets of their clients. I love the whole ethos in this organization. And then I moved to London, and I think a week before I moved to London, Lehman Brothers collapsed. And the offices of State Street were in Canary Wharf, where also the Lehman offices were. So when I moved to London, the whole financial system was ablaze. And I was, again, this naive Austrian. I was dropped in the middle of it all. And State Street, of course, also had to make cuts because it was such an insecure and very difficult situation for the financial sector. So I remember this one day, it was perhaps in my second or third month, where I was supposed to have a meeting in the afternoon with 5 people, and at 4:00 in the afternoon I was the only one left. All the others had been fired.
Oh,
so
wow.
It was a very, very difficult time. Yeah, it was a very difficult time. And since then, a lot of my colleagues have actually been rehired, but at that time financial institutions were forced to make these short-term decisions because the world around them was unraveling. And it was very challenging. It was also very challenging on the personal front. I was actually supposed to live in London, and my now husband was supposed to live in London, but his company also cancelled all his plans for moving there. So I ended up staying only a year in-house, actually. So it was only 1 year for my first in-house job in the finance industry, and I loved every bit of it, even though it was very challenging. And I still think back sometimes and say, oh, State Street, that was a company I could easily have seen myself for many, many years to come in. But privately it was just getting too difficult commuting between London and Copenhagen. So it turned out to be a short stint in
Sure.
London for only about a year.
Understood. And then I suppose you had a range of positions in terms of growth within continuing within financial services. We don't need to go into all of those positions, but I suppose what I'm keen to understand is the lessons that you've learned on the way in, I suppose, sort of leading teams, particularly through change and adversity that I know many financial institutions were facing at that time. Perhaps you could just share some takeaways from that period of time, and what that was like.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it was many years of change, fundamental change in the finance industry. And if I try to reduce it to one lesson learned, is that for me, the only effective form of leadership through change is values-based leadership, going back to the purpose of the organization and to your own purpose as a leader, and base your leadership through change on your shared values with your people, on the behaviors that we want to encourage, and punish the behaviors that we don't want to see. Because it's also very true that the finance industry before the financial crisis had gotten used to value destructive behaviors and practices that wasn't adding to society, and was very far from the purpose of finance as such. The purpose of finance as such is to keep the wheels of the real economy, as we call it, the real economy, spinning, rather than make money for themselves. And finance had removed itself very far from that purpose. And again, I was so lucky in that way, because I actually got into finance working in-house when that self-reflection and that change of mindset was happening. And I was then so lucky also to work in institutions that really took that very seriously, and that got back to the values of the old universal bank, and was very self-reflecting on, okay, what is our role? What is our purpose? It is to support our customers. We need to put our customers first, and we can't make our money trading the excess derivative of some synthetic financial product. Mm-hmm. So being part of that and navigating that required time and time again to check in with, okay, the decision I need to make now, is that what I can stand for in terms of my purpose and values, and the purpose and values of the organization?
Sure, because I think you've said at the beginning, from your childhood and through those early years, the values have been something that have been so pivotal to you. I suppose going into financial services, which at that point probably had a pretty damaged reputation, holding on to those values must have been challenging at times, probably quite empowering in others, but holding true to those wouldn't have been an easy task, as you were climbing the corporate ladder as well to ensure that you were delivering what they wanted. So yeah, how did you have any particular moments where you saw those perhaps being in imbalance, and how you were having to be really strong with what you believed in?
Yeah. So I've thought about that a lot, obviously, being an Austrian social democrat in a global financial institution is quite a unique place. And for me, that uniqueness has really been a source of strength. So also my values and sticking to my guns and holding my integrity higher and above anything else has been my strength, and was the main reason why I was always promoted. So, because I never shied away from saying what I believe was the right thing to do. It was not always the case that people agreed and then did what I thought was right, but I always said it, and I called out bad behavior, and I tried to do it with Austrian charm, and I tried to do it in a positive way, so that you don't you don't want to end up in the space where you're always the one complaining, because then you can't make any change either. So it is important that you, of course, come from a positive place and try to bring people along, rather than just saying, you're an old dinosaur, please leave the bank. That's not gonna get anywhere. But that has really helped me a lot, both to stick to my own purpose and say, okay, I've said it, I've done it, but also it is something that was seen as a unique asset that was very much needed in the bank at that time. So I ended up heading our CEO office, working very, very closely with our CEO, exactly because he saw that quality in me. Right, I had the integrity and I had the freedom also then to roam around and make my values known. Also because I moved around a lot, right? I moved around a lot between organizations, but also geographically. So I always felt I had a plan B. So I was never afraid of being fired. So if they fire me, what's the worst thing? I move back to Austria and I live in the countryside and I have a great life. So I never felt that there was so much on the line for me personally that I couldn't be myself and take the risk of finding something else to do if they didn't feel I contributed anymore.
For sure, yeah, that authenticity, or feeling empowered to have your authenticity and lead with values, I think is something that's so crucial in this space. So when was it that sustainability came onto the agenda prominently for you?
Yes, and it is actually it is a point in time. So of course, CSR, corporate social responsibility, as it was called back then, was a thing. And it was a thing already in Brussels when I left Brussels, and you had the first laws also on non-financial reporting. But for me, the one milestone that changed everything also for my career direction was 2018, when the European Commission published its Sustainable Finance Action Plan. And at that time also I saw in the bank that we were starting to make money of sustainability. So there was a strong momentum behind issuing green bonds. Clients were interested in green forms of financing. The data was beginning to be there as well. The shift, the energy transition was starting, in particular in the Nordics, where I was so fortunate to work, which is really one of the regions that are globally a front runner on sustainability. So I saw what I always hoped to contribute to, which is business as a force for good. That was starting to happen. So that is when I knew, okay, now I can pivot 100% to sustainability. And it didn't happen as quickly as I wanted it to be. But in 2018, I clearly saw the opportunity that now there will be momentum behind it. Finance will move in that direction. Regulation moves in that direction. So from that time on, actually, I also, from a technical perspective on sustainable finance, I really educated myself both in my own time, but I also started, and maybe we can get back to that, I also started working as a freelancer. Actually, I left my job. I took leave of absence from my corporate job, and I got stuck into sustainable finance as what I saw then as the future of the second leg of my career.
Sure, understand. And then because there's some prominent questions that I really want to get to, and I know we have a time limit. So you had this kind of freelancing route, leave from absence to, I suppose, specialise, but you did then go back to the bank in some capacity, as I understand it. Was that then in a sustainability role?
Yeah, that's correct. So between 2018 and 2020, I don't want to leave that out because it's another claim to fame. I lived in Brazil. I lived in Brazil for 2 years and I love the country. And I can only recommend to anyone who has ever got the chance to visit. So I had taken leave of absence. I was a freelance consultant and I really got stuck into sustainable finance, doing consulting work. But then, as we all know, what happened in 2020 is what happened, Josh?
COVID,
as you call it in the UK. It's interesting.
Yes.
On the continent, we say the pandemic. Here in the UK, you always say COVID happened. Yeah, yes. COVID. That was not a good thing to happen, right? When you work in Brazil, it was a difficult time. So we had to move back to Denmark actually at that time. And my leave of absence then ended because I wasn't in Brazil anymore. I was back in Denmark, so I went back to work in the bank, And they asked me, so what do you want to do? And I said, sustainability. Of course, that's what I wanted to do. So yeah, I was fortunate enough to then get the responsibility for a team that was doing product development on sustainability, because I knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to work in the CSR space doing the reporting, and I wanted to do something where there was real business value, where you made money, where you had a connection to the P&L, and also create value for the clients through sustainability, right? Giving them tools to manage their ESG data, to be able to access green forms of financing, and hopefully get the greenium, the premium, the cheaper finance, because they can actually prove their ESG credentials. So that is something that motivated me very much, and I was lucky enough to be given a small team to do that. But I'm also a bit of a corporate animal, which you can probably see looking at my CV. So it very fast happened that I was promoted very, very, very fast. And in the end, I was responsible for 500 people. And out of the 500, I think it was 8 who were doing the sustainability work that I actually originally wanted to do. So then reflecting on that, it became clear to me, if I really want to make the change and live my purpose even stronger, and because I'm such a corporate animal, I need to leave the corporate world.
For sure. So this is how the advisory mindset came about. I mean, obviously you had done it freelance. Was that for yourself, or were you working for a company in Brazil?
So I was actually freelancing, so I had my own company, but I worked with partners. So I worked in particular with one of my great colleagues, who is my colleague again now, Anders Klinkby. Shout out to Anders Klinkby in Denmark, who had set up his own business and who was kind enough to take me in, and we did some projects together. And then I had other projects with, for example, the German Development Agency directly in Brazil. But that was a great community to have back then as well, because everything was new. Sustainable finance was new. So sitting as a freelancer on your own in an office in Brasilia won't get you anywhere. So I was lucky enough to work with Anders Klinkby and also Bent Enge, his partner. And Bent Enge used to be the chief investment officer for the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. So these were people with a very, very long-standing background in asset management that were driven by the same purpose as me, and where we together figure it out. So now we have this thing called the EU taxonomy, and we need to do ESG due diligence on a wind farm for a German institutional investor. How do we do it? Well, let's get cracking. We know how asset management works. Let's get cracking. Let's see how we can think about these concepts and ESG in a new way. So it was a great time. It really felt like being pioneers.
Yeah, well, it's funny because, as you say, you led at the beginning with, I tell people perhaps that, you just sort of go with the flow, you have your values and things happen. But it seems the timing of your career, every time you made these moves was time where there was a big shift in the viewpoint of the area that you were looking at. So, I coming out of the pandemic, if we call it that rather than COVID, 2021 was the time for sustainability consultancies that really started to gain prominence. So interesting that's the time that happened for you. Was it always going to be moving into sustainability consultancy when you left the bank? Or did you have any other ideas of what you would do at that point?
You are very... That's a good reflection, Josh, on these milestones I took and when they happened. I never thought about it this way, but it's actually, maybe there is a force out there that pushes us in these directions more than me just reacting to whatever dumped into my lap. It's quite interesting. I did consider alternatives. So actually, I was not convinced, again, because I'm quite a corporate animal, that consultancy would be 100% my thing. So I did consider in-house positions on sustainability. So chief sustainability officer positions. But what really made the decision in the end easy for me is that I didn't want to be a cost center. So for many years in the corporate world, I was a cost center. I didn't have P&L responsibility. I was in a support function. And as a chief sustainability officer in most organizations, some have actually shifted that now, which I think is great. But very often you are a cost center and you are a support function. And that just limits and now I'm being very corporate, that limits your power. Because if you don't have P&L responsibility, if you don't bring in the revenues, of course, logically, your power will be more limited than if you did. So that consideration, and also because I'm motivated by seeing the value I create for clients. That brought me back to, yes, I want to go into consultancy again, being now much older and much wiser than I was originally when I started out as a consultant, to see this direct value also in monetary terms that you create for the client. And clients will always push you, and they should, because they pay you good money. So you really, really have to prove your money's worth. Which for me then was the perfect fit, working with the purpose and what I strongly believe in, contributing to the world, and also since my beginnings shifted more to the E, because I know that is the most urgent challenges we need to address. But at the same time, also the commercial side of being a consultant and creating this very, very tangible value, having your own P&L that you need to drive, making sure that we also are viable and sustainable commercially. Yeah.
For sure. And as I alluded to, the landscape for technology and advisory businesses in ESG and sustainability has exploded dramatically in the past 3 years since you made that move. What was it, or what has it been that's eventually been that pull factor to position green for you over the variety of other providers that are out there in the market right now, and what is it about the organization that you believe makes it so special?
It's the tech, 100%. So I knew that my biggest gap also in my skill set is that I'm not a digital native. I look very young and I sound very young. I hope to all of you here on the podcast,
yes, of
and
course.
to you, John. yes, of course. But when I studied university, I didn't have a computer, not even a desktop computer. I didn't have an email address. I didn't. When I did my papers, when I did my thesis, I was physically in a physical library where I took photocopies of different magazines, articles, books, and then I typed on the computer in the university, because when I finished, we had a computer, right?
Yes.
And desk big machines. So and throughout my career, I knew, of course, software development, because I worked in a bank, and the bank is nothing else than a digital business nowadays. But I wasn't close enough to it. And when I made my last career move, AI was already a thing. And I knew that if I didn't educate myself and didn't get close to business who was right in that space, in the digital space, I would become a dinosaur myself, right? And I definitely don't want that. I need to work for many, many, many years to come. And in particular on sustainability, the biggest challenge we have is data. So I knew that I had to find a place where they have the skill set on the digital side, and where they are very, very diligent and aware of the data challenge. And they are Position Green, just dating all the boxes.
How were you introduced to them? You through your contact previously.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it was Anders Klingby again,
Yes.
who, Anders Klingby, we go way back, because we worked together in the old bank, the Dinosaur Bank, which is also a wonderful institution, but that's how we got to know each other. So we kind of have parallel tracks into the sustainability world. And his consultancy, his sustainable finance consultancy, actually, he sold to Position Green.
I see.
So he sold his own consultancy to Position Green, because he saw the same that I did, that you had to have the data management and the software capabilities to be successful as a sustainability consultancy. And it was him who introduced me. It was him who introduced me to Daniel Gatt, who is now my boss, our CEO. And Daniel has an interesting background himself. He comes from Deloitte, so he comes very much also from the traditional side of consultancy, but also data management, financial data management. And Daniel, in 2015, together with his co-founders, he also saw the data challenge already back then in Sweden, because obviously Sweden was a front runner on the ESG data side as well. And they saw there are no systems to manage non-financial data, which is a completely different beast than financial data. So we have a much longer history than many other consultancies and software providers on digital data management because of our Scandinavian history. So that's how I got to meet the crowd, and it's a fantastic organization, very purpose driven. It's got the Scandinavian roots that I also really, really cherish, having lived there for many years, speaking the languages, and yet we also have our global aspirations. We are expanding, and I can see that we're just in a position where we can make impact at scale. So as a consultant on my own, I will always be limited to the hours I can work. Yet when I invest my hours in software, I can scale my impact to thousands of companies because our brains are codified and commoditized into the software and making the product better. So our clients really can show their impact also in the numbers, which is at the end of the day what it is about in business, right? You manage what you measure.
For sure, absolutely. So look, I have some quick fire questions for you that I would love to pick some of that brain power and knowledge that you have, but I'm going to have to ask you to be high level with your answers so that we can get through some of these impact questions. So number one, what's the one piece of unconventional advice that you would say you frequently give to clients about how they advance their sustainability agendas?
Talk more to each other. So the water cooler, the pub, that is where decisions are made, not in your ESG committee.
Great. How do you quantify the impact of your advisory business? Let's put the data to your data business to one side, but the advisory business and those services on a client's business performance.
Yeah, so the 5-second soundbite there is, on the one hand, of course, direct revenues. So what is the money you can make out of new services and new products linked to your sustainable transition? And then secondly, and for most cliently, most important, what's the value you lose, both in the short, medium, and long term, if you do not embark on the sustainable transition? And that the second part is extremely important to make visible, because that is what companies notoriously are bad at: the opportunity cost and what is the revenue lost, what is the overall value lost if you miss out on the sustainable transition.
For sure, and is often a more powerful message to a leader than what they will win is what they will lose. So I absolutely see that. What are some of the emerging technologies, perhaps some that Position Green are working on right now, that you think are going to be most promising or prominent in accelerating the sustainability transformation and transition?
Yeah, and this won't be surprising to your listeners, but it's on the one hand, of course, AI, both for the automation of data collection, but also for the interpretation of data and for the simple things like writing the first draft of the sustainability report. I always believe for many years to come, we'll have a human in there to have to interpret and use AI. AI is just a tool, it's a machine. You need to know how to use it and then to edit its output. And the second one is clearly the Internet of Things. So that will help us a lot with data collection, smart meters, but more than that, I mean, we don't talk enough about it. We talk about AI a lot, but the Internet of Things and how we actually connect the world through devices and therefore can measure our impact on the world, positive and negative, in a much better way. We have made great strides, and this will be a great field of development for many years to come.
Sure. If you could see one more thing happening in sustainability and one thing that happens less in 2024, what would they be?
So what I see happen and what I hope to happen, but what I hope to see more of, and where I do feel, in particular now that I've spent a couple of days in the UK, a lot of companies moving into, is really the regeneration mindset. So it's not enough to reduce your negative impact. We actually need to regenerate, because a lot, in particular on biodiversity and our nature challenges, we are in a place where it's not enough to conserve. We must actually regenerate. So that is definitely also for me intellectually, I need to spend much more time on and need to push my clients further in this thinking. And I hope what we will see less of is the age-old discussion whether ESG is dead. And now that we have an ESG backlash in the US and in Europe, is it dead? And yeah, change happens in lumps. Change is not linear. We will not say a linear decrease of ESG regulations. We are now in a phase where there will be some rolling back, because that's just the political reality we are in. But be in no doubt that the trend we have seen will continue over time, because there is no alternative. We are depleting the resources that our economy is built on faster than we are replenishing it. And at some point, we will just hit a point where it's not possible anymore, and your business is not viable if you don't have a ESG sustainable business. So there's no way around it, but it won't happen linearly. We will have these lumps of going 2 steps ahead, 1 step back. So let's not over focus on the short term. Let's focus on the medium and long term journey we are on.
For sure. And my last quickfire question, could you share a tip or an advice for success that an organization, that anyone that's listening to this could implement right now in their business that could have some impact?
Take your sustainability data management more seriously. Don't delegate it to the most junior member in your finance team. Right now, this is a decision that needs to be made at the executive table. The way that you set up your non-financial data management, what you want to measure, how you measure it, understanding the data trends, cannot be delegated. It's so important to get this right in the next 2 years, because it will stay with you forever. And if you don't have an action plan and a handle on that, then disclosure is just exposure. So take it seriously at the top of the organization as well.
For sure. I would say that we're seeing this a lot with our clients that we're talking to now about these roles being created, firstly, which is a positive. But then the question is, well, where do they report? And it's almost like sort of pushing the responsibility away from each other rather than embracing it and taking it on. Do you have a viewpoint just quickly on where that role, from a data perspective, the reporting perhaps perspective, should sit? CFO, CSO, anywhere else?
Yeah, it's always dangerous to give these formulaic advice, because it really depends on your company. It depends on your company culture, it depends on your industry, and it depends in particular on your maturity on sustainability as such. But my general advice will always be, it should be where data management is handled with the CFO in general, because there you have the competencies of handling data, no matter what it is. But you really need to make sure that then it's not down prioritized, because it's a new field, as we just talked about, right? Because then you're not mature enough in your organization, and you need to anchor it in a center of excellence for sustainability, where it can be protected until the child is strong enough and the teenager has grown strong enough so that it can defend itself from the other organizational dynamics, right? Because what you don't want is throw a baby into the very, very grown-up world of finance, because then it won't get the nurturing it deserves. So that is, in general, it should be there, but your organization might not be mature enough yet.
For sure. It's interesting, actually. We have a client right now who've just hired somebody in that regard, and it's going to sit in sustainability for 12 to 18 months as the organisation is going to continue to mature, but with a very much a pathway into the CFO's team after that period of time. So, keeping it protected for a period of time to get it to a level of maturity, and then throwing it in with the others that are slightly more mature. So I certainly see that. So my last question then, Julia, is by the end of your career, what would you like your own personal legacy to be, to show that you've left the world better than you found it?
Oh my God, that's a big question. The end of my career. I don't think I will have an end of my career ever. I will probably have to work forever, because that is the generation I'm part of. That's our fate, probably. But what I personally want to be able to say is that I've always held up my integrity high, and that I have gradually over time really moved closer and closer to my own personal purpose, and that I can say that what I do in my job is 100% aligned with my values, that I do what I'm good at, but also that I do what I'm passionate about. And that's such a privileged position to be, and I'm so grateful that I can be part of this community, that you are also part of, Josh, that we have made our way into sustainability and can really make a difference every day. And I hope that I can stick to that for the rest of my career, for sure.
For sure. Thank you. So if there's people that have listened today and they feel as though there's great connection that they could have with you, or they're just like your general advice, are you happy to connect and engage and network with others?
Oh, I love it. I love it. So I love it. Please reach out on my LinkedIn, connect, send me messages. I love to make these connections worldwide. You know, I feel I'm a global citizen. I've lived in many places, and it's always such a pleasure to hear from people that have met you in different circumstances, because we need each other. We need, you know, the water cooler conversation can also take place on LinkedIn. Talk to each other, support each other, help each other, so that we can keep up our motivation and make sure that we create a better world for our kids. It's a cliche, but it is at the end of the day what life is about too.
For sure, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the time and effort that you've put into today. It's been much appreciated, and sharing your words of wisdom. Love to hear how things progress with Precision Green. It sounds like the organisation is really set up for success. So let's stay in contact for sure. But for now, just thank you so much for joining us today, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thanks a lot, Josh. Thanks for a great conversation, and see you again soon.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Better Than We Found It. I hope you have found value from this to support your own purpose-led journey. This episode was brought to you by GS2 Partnership, my organisation focused on providing talent solutions for sustainably focused organisations. We are driven by our purpose of connecting the people who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. If you are looking for a partner to support you with your hiring plans, or you are looking for your own career next steps, please reach out to us or personally drop me a message on LinkedIn. It's great to hear from listeners to the podcast, and I'd welcome the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for our next episode.